I'd like to welcome all of you to Freedom Voices with the John Birch Society. My name is Calvin Clark, and we have a special guest tonight, an author of two books, The United Nations Exposed and also Global Tyranny Step by Step by William F. Jasper. I met Bill after he went to the Rio Summit in 1992 and reported on the Agenda 21, which began there with 175 countries meeting to come to some United Nations sustainability program that has infiltrated all of the countries now. And I'm grateful that Mr. Jasper will be with us here in just a second. I want to first offer a moment of silence and because this is about Vietnam and what happened in Vietnam, and if we could do that for just about a few moments. Okay, I want to welcome all of you again. As we heard almost nothing in this country, as you've tuned in for this webinar, I think of those who wish that there were silence on the battlefield and that diplomacy, honest diplomacy and honesty could sweep over the hearts of the leaders to not have war when they dedicate their lives to a covenant that each individual is of infinite worth. So at this time, I would like to offer a blessing, a prayer, and my name is Calvin Clark. I'm with the John Birch Society, and I am grateful to the chapters that have helped sponsor this event tonight. So if you could join me in a prayer, and then we will do a pledge of allegiance. Father in heaven, we're grateful for the love that thou hast given us, for the Psalms that we learn many truths from in the scriptures and the holy words. We are grateful for the peace that you help bestow upon the hearts of angry men that helps them to gain resolve. We pray for that the solutions and the tools presented today will help edify and uplift those who are participants, and also that our presenter and speaker and wonderful man who's dedicated his time and much of his wealth and effort to help bring forth this opportunity to learn and to teach the history, the true history of what has gone on before us, that we might not repeat it if it's bad history. And we pray for a blessing upon all the soldiers and the family members that have already gone before us, and soldiers that have gone before us who pledged their lives and fortunes. And we pray that we might live worthy of the blessing of peace again and honesty again. And I say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. So if you could, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we will turn the time over to Mr. Jasper. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So before I have Bill come on, I just want you to know maybe one reason why I joined the John Birch Society, and that was because their tools, the education, the books that they've carried forward in their book list, their American Opinion bookstores over the years, and the books that they've promoted have been a huge blessing in my life. and also the New American magazine. Bill Jasper has worked for the New American for 49 years. He's been a correspondent to many countries far from America, and he has dug deep into the history of the United States as well as other countries. He was a special researcher with the Oklahoma City bombing, which some of that is also in the Vietnam, the Truth About Vietnam New American magazine that we just published, that he published. And also, he did a lot of research with the United Nations and the things that have gone on with them. And that's why he wrote this wonderful book, The United Nations Exposed, which gives the true account of the United Nations and all of their branches. At this time, I want to welcome Bill Jasper, and I know there's so much more I could say about him, including that he's also the author of the Insider Report, which is a fantastic summary that, as a member of the John Birch Society, you'll get that as well. So at this time, let's see if we can have him come right on and begin our meeting with us and his presentation. So please welcome Mr. William F. Jasper.
Thank you, Calvin. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And I want to thank all of you who are tuned in here tonight. I see I've noticed some of the names coming across the screen. I recognize many of them. I see people from all across the country. So welcome to all, and I appreciate you being here tonight. I just finished this past weekend with Calvin, so I thank him for setting this up. But Calvin and I were in California, in the Bay Area, speaking to Vietnamese American and Vietnam veterans organizations, giving this presentation, a shortened presentation of this. And I know that there are many Vietnam veterans who are on tonight. That's been one of my pleasures and honors as I've given these presentations around around the country over the last few years, is meeting many of the Vietnam veterans. And I encourage you, if you're out there, to contact me at the New American. Our information will be on there. Because these are you have stories that need to be told, and you can confirm and add to what the knowledge that we already have. And I'm going to be sharing with you quite a number of things that I think you'll find very helpful, all of you who are on tonight. So we are right now on the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War, the end of the Vietnam War, or so we are told it's the end of the Vietnam War. But in truth, the war never ended. The war never ended for those millions of people in Southeast Asia who are in Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, who are still living under communist totalitarian rule. Many of whom are still in prison camps, or in the whole countries of which are prison camps. The war never ended for our as many as 2,000, 2,200 POWs who are never returned, hundreds of whom were confirmed alive, but whom our government lied repeatedly, claiming that all had been brought home. And of course, for the family members who lost loved ones, who gave their lives in the war, or who were never returned as POWs. The war is never over for them either. But the war is not over for us, the rest of Americans who don't fit into those categories either. This is our latest issue of the new, well, actually, there's another one since then, but this came out on April 28th, 2 days before the April 30th 50-year anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War, at least known as the fall of Saigon. So we know, and we have already seen, a massive amount of regurgitated propaganda from the 60s, 70s during the war that is now being recirculated in the media, again, with uh, repeating the lies and the myths, the misinformation, the disinformation. And so it is important for us to be truth tellers. And that's what we are at the New American and at the John Birch Society. And so in this particular issue of the New American magazine, there are several very important articles. First, the main cover story by Harcourt Kirkwood, Americans are still paying for the Vietnam War, which goes into the human toll as well as the political toll and the financial, the economic toll that is still going on. It's a very important article. Court Kirkwood has been involved in this for a long time. He was very much involved, as was I, in the POW MIA effort in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And very important article. As he points out, we lost nearly 59,000 killed in Vietnam, many more wounded. Of course, over a million Vietnamese killed in the time period that we were there, and then millions more in Cambodia and Laos. This is another important story that from 1968 that we reprinted. The man you see there is R.D. Mad Dog Patrick Mahoney, a very close friend of mine. He was a uh, uh, Mac VSOG special ops operator, Green Beret in Vietnam. And he is the character that was used for the model for the book and the movie, The Green Berets, the Peterson character. He was legendary for his operations throughout all of Southeast Asia. And in this article, The Tragedy of Southeast Asia, a Vietnam veteran looks back at the war. He came back after multiple tours of duty, and he couldn't believe all of the lies and misinformation that were being spread about Vietnam, about the communists there, about the American soldiers, Marines, the fighting men who were there. And he wrote a very important article that we decided to reprint as essential for Americans to understand what was going on then. Another article in this one takes a bit of a different tack, and that is Vietnam's Godly Grunt. It's about Father Vincent Capodanno, the chaplain, who was known as the Grunt Padre amongst the Marines, who gave his life on the battlefield for his men. And he is one of a number of chaplains who gave their lives in Vietnam. And again, it runs totally contrary to the narrative that we're told about the character of the Americans who were fighting in Vietnam. I was very honored during my engagements in the Bay Area this past weekend to be able to share the podium with Professor Vu Cu Thi. He is an author, historian. He is the foremost expert on the Vietnam War. He grew up in North Vietnam, had to flee there when the communists took over, went to South Vietnam, and then was forced to flee there. He is a professor here in the United States now. He is these two books, the First Republic of Vietnam, South Vietnam, and the Alliance Against Communist North Vietnam, 1945 to 1963. And the follow-up book to it, A Great Secret, Did the USA Lose the War in Vietnam on Purpose? And an outstanding scholar and just a fine gentleman. I've been honored to be on a number of programs with him across the country. And I've interviewed him and will be interviewing him again soon, God willing, and we will have that online at the New American and the John Birch Society. So here we are 50 years later, and the massive propaganda that was fed to the American people over and over again has embedded so many lies, so many misunderstandings, so much confusion, and disinformation in the minds of the American people that uh, we are under no illusion that in this 45-minute, 50-minute talk that we're going to be able to undo that, or that our single issue of the magazine is going to do that. They are both very important efforts in this fight. Every bit of truth helps to dislodge a part of a lie. And so we are doing a service anytime we are a truth teller. God rewards that, and it takes just a little bit of truth to overcome a lie. But the John Birch Society has put together a web page. We did this a number of years ago, and then it was taken down by sabotage, and we've recently gotten it reconstituted. And in this is at the John Birch Society website. It's jbs.org/Vietnam. And so that's jbs.org/Vietnam. And it will take you to this webpage. And this will do a tremendous amount for anyone who's willing to spend the time to overcome the lies and the misinformation that they have, and all of us do. I mean, I've been studying this and wasn't alive at the time of the Vietnam War and was myself misled by a lot of the propaganda. And so it takes some effort to undo that, but the truth is worth the effort. And so on this webpage, we have over 200 articles covering all aspects of the Vietnam War. And we'll continue adding to it because we have additional materials that we put out during the war and immediately after the war and during the POW MIA recovery efforts that still haven't been added to it yet. And we will be putting more videos as well as graphics up there. Not all of the graphics and videos that we had on our original site have been reconstituted yet, but that's a work in progress. So this is the homepage of our Vietnam War landing page, I should say. So in there, one of the articles that I would direct your attention to, because it encapsulates a lot of the lies and the myths, 7 myths about the Vietnam War. And in this one, we cover a tremendous amount of material that will hopefully dislodge a lot of that misinformation that the average person has. Let's just run through some of the myths that are covered extensively in this article. Myth number 1, the United States was defeated militarily in Southeast Asia. Myth 2, the impact of the Pentagon's rules of engagement on our military capabilities in Vietnam has been vastly exaggerated. Myth 3, the North Vietnamese communists won ultimately because they occupied the moral high ground. They were fighting for their homeland against a foreign invader. Myth number 4, the Vietnamese who fought against us were more nationalists than communists. However, the communists were willing to help them free their country from the French and later American invaders. Myth number 5, claims by conservatives and the military that media coverage of the Vietnam War was unbalanced, hostile toward the military, or even anti-patriotic and subversive are not substantiated by the facts. Many scholarly studies have shown that the media coverage on the whole was fair and accurate. Myth number 6, it was America's pathological anti-communist obsession that caused our leaders to get us involved in the Vietnam quagmire. Myth number 7, all of America's POWs were returned following the 1973 peace agreement, and Vietnam is now cooperating to find the remains of all unresolved MIAs. Getting back to myth number 1, that America could not have militarily won the war. This is such a ubiquitous myth and lie. And so I have here one of the quotes, which we have in the out of many, is by Major General Raymond Davis. He was served in World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War. He was the commander of the 3rd Marine Division in Vietnam. He's a Medal of Honor recipient and many other awards. And he said, quote, "It is important to expose the fact that our defeat in Vietnam was a political one and not a military one, because as far as I'm concerned, my Marines in Quang Tri proved to me and proved to anybody who came to take a look that we could easily destroy the enemy forces which could not stand up to us at all. It was a one-sided, one-way affair, and we were on top." General Curtis LeMay, again, another veteran of World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. He was Chief of Staff of the Air Force. He's legendary in the Air Force strategy. He said, quote, "The only reason American soldiers are bleeding and dying in Vietnam today is because our leaders have tied their hands behind their backs. The only reason we haven't had victory in Vietnam is because our leaders have done everything possible to avoid it." Now, in the article, we have many other leaders who say essentially the same thing. Are they all just misguided, bitter, old military leaders who just won't accept the facts? No, when you look at the facts, it is true, as we will show. But so how did all of these lies and myths come about? Well, most Americans have never heard of this man, Pham Jung An. And in fact, even now, after he has been exposed, the vast majority of Americans have never heard of him. He was Ho Chi Minh's spy and propagandist at Time magazine. In fact, he was more than that. He was more than just a spy and a propagandist. He was their #1 agent in South Vietnam. He was the foremost expert, quote unquote, that all of the press corps relied upon. So the book on the right of the screen, Perfect Spy, The Incredible Double Life of Pham Jung An, is by Larry Berman, professor at UC Davis. That came out in 2009. The other book, The Spy Who Loved Us, is by Thomas Bass, and it came out in 2018. There have been several other books written about him and a few other articles, but this man was central to all of the propaganda that flowed to the American people. And unfortunately, there were so many American journalists, so-called, who blindly accepted what was clearly communist propaganda by him and anti-American, anti-South Vietnam propaganda. And they were willing, because they were already predisposed to believe it and to go along with him. Time magazine finally came clean many years later, but they didn't totally come clean. Here's a story in Time magazine, The Surprising Story of the Spy Who Worked for Time. So in this one, you see the photo of Pham An, and he's showing here his press card in the Time magazine interview with him. So he was the main agent that what he had served as an intelligence agent going back to the 1940s. And then he was insinuated into South Vietnam to be an advisor to the military and eventually to be a journalist, so-called. And since he knew supposedly everything in South Vietnam, all the journalists, and because he was so gregarious, so charming, all the journalists relied on him for advice on whom to interview, how to slant their stories. And we will see, if you go back to the 7 myths about Vietnam or many of the other stories that we have on our website, we talk about the Tet Offensive. And for the Vietnam veterans who are in the audience, and for the well-read members of the general public, know that the Tet Offensive of 1968, when the communists threw all of their forces in South Vietnam into one huge attack, that was presented as a victory for the communists, but it turned out it was a total defeat for them. They were everywhere. They were slaughtered, and it totally destroyed their entire forces. There was really nothing left of the Viet Cong as they were. After that, they had to rely on the NVA, the North Vietnamese Army, which was, again, as were they, supplied by Russia and China, Soviet Union and China. And it was this man, Pham Chong An, who came up with the idea that the media should treat it as a victory by the Viet Cong, not a defeat, not a smashing defeat. In a couple of weeks, I will be giving this presentation, and in the audience and guest speakers along with me are going to be Colonel Kenny Moore, U.S. Marine Corps, and a couple other gentlemen who were involved, who were there at TET and will be giving testimony about it. But this shows in spades the duplicity, the deceit, the treachery that was involved in the media and in our government. So this individual is not well known to many Americans, but he should be. He was an Australian journalist, quote unquote, who was a Soviet agent, an actual KGB agent. His name was Wilfred Burchett. You see one of his books, Vietnam, Inside Story of the Guerrilla War. Like Pham Chong An, he was completely a propagandist for the communists. Yet he wrote for Australian and British and American magazines and newspapers and spread their propaganda. And it was later proved from the Soviet archives. Vladimir Bukovsky was able to get into the archives, and he was able to show the actual records of his payments by the Soviets. He was paid monthly. So there are many other, well, before we move on to this one, I should mention that Wilfred Burchett, the Soviet agent, and Pham Chong An, they were actual hardcore communist agents. The vast majority of American journalists who retold and translated their propaganda were not wholly communist agents. A few were. We don't have time to go into all of that. But they were disposed in the anti-American, pro-communist direction. And so they gladly accepted and passed on to the American people what was clearly a lie. So one of the biggest untold stories, which we were not alone in telling, but we certainly were the main ones telling in the John Birch Society and in our publications. Before the New American, it was American Opinion and the Review of the News. I wrote for both of those. And we published many articles and promoted and reviewed and sold and distributed many books by other authors telling the story about communist aid and trade, about the American government's policies of trading with the enemy, that is, giving communist Russia and its satellites in Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, etc., all of the technology, including war technology and armaments, that they were then transshipping to Vietnam to kill our boys. So this is helping the enemy kill our soldiers. The subtitle says, while our boys were dying in Vietnam, the U.S. government and American businesses provided technology and extended credits so the Soviet Union and other allies of North Vietnam. Each of those blue titles is a title of an article which goes into depth about all of this. So we have in these articles brought out much of information that was in the Congress, put into the congressional record by concerned congressmen, outraged congressmen and senators, information that we dug out ourselves out of the U.S. Department of State, Department of Defense, Department of Commerce, showing all of these things that were taking place. One of the things that most fighting men who were in Vietnam are aware of is the handcuffs, the shackles that were put on them under the so-called rules of engagement, the ROEs, that prevented them from taking the fight to the enemy. And we'll get into a little bit of specifics on that, but they didn't know, and we didn't know, the American people, the full extent of this until the rules of engagement were finally placed in the congressional record, thanks to the efforts of Senator Barry Goldwater of Arizona. You see, it was put in, he put them in there on March 6, 1985. Now, you will find a full reproduction of these on our website, the jbs.org/Vietnam, under rules of engagement. And so Barry Goldwater said, these layers of restrictions, which were constantly changing and were almost impossible to memorize or understand, although it was required of our pilots, granted huge sanctuary areas to the enemy. When certain limits would at last be removed after repeated appeals by the Joint Chiefs, the reductions were made only in gradual steps and seldom were strong enough to serve our strategic ends. Numerous partial and total bombing halts interrupted the effectiveness of earlier bombing campaigns. Often, when limited extensions of target areas were granted, they were unexpectedly canceled and withdrawn shortly afterwards. Again, that was Senator Barry Goldwater. Now, what were some of those rules of engagement? As you see there, SAM missile sites could not be bombed while they were under construction, but only after they became operational. Pilots were not permitted to attack communist MiGs sitting on the ground. The only time it could be attacked was after it was in the air, had been identified, and had shown hostile intentions. Even then, its base could not be bombed. Military truck depots located just over 200 yards from a road could not be destroyed. Enemy trucks on a road could be attacked, but if they drove off the road, they were safe from bombing. If South Vietnamese forward air controller was not on an aircraft, it was forbidden to bomb enemy troops during a firefight, even though the Reds were clearly visible and were being pointed at by an officer on the ground. The aircraft's bombs were dumped in the ocean. So another one of the articles that I would draw your attention to here is entitled Heroes of Vietnam. And as you can see there, maybe you can read it from from your screen. It was written by Dr. Pham Kinh Vinh. He was a Vietnamese historian, author, journalist. He was a battalion commander in the First Vietnam War, the Second Vietnam War. Uh, and anyway, in this article, he takes to task the media and points out all the heroic activities on behalf of the Vietnamese people that he witnessed himself and that were daily evident throughout the country, where American soldiers were taking care of children, helping them, helping the old people, defending them, helping them with medical care. It ran completely contrary to, for instance, he quotes in there, American famous historian Henry Steele Commager, who refers to the American soldiers as barbarians. He says worse than the Japanese in Manchuria and worse than the Nazis in Poland. That's how he referred to the American soldiers and Marines and Navy fighting men over there. And Dr. Pham Kinh Vinh was outraged by this. And so anyway, in this article, he sets the record straight on that score. So American Opinion, the Review of the News, the New American, the John Birch Society Bulletin relied a great deal on what was really happening throughout Southeast Asia, and particularly in Vietnam, on this man, Hilaire Duberrier. And we have reprinted his book, Background to Betrayal, The Tragedy of Vietnam. It came out in 1965, so a decade before the fall of Saigon. But this is essential reading to understand how this all came about. And he is uniquely qualified, he was a very good friend of mine, mentor to me. And on his passing, he gave me his files and his library. This is Hilaire Duberrier in China in 1938 with the Chinese nationalist generals in the top picture. Down at the bottom corner, you see him in Vietnam in the 1960s. On his right is the Pope of the Cao Dai sect in Vietnam, and on his left, a bishop of the Cao Dai sect. They were an anti-communist sect, a Cao Dai Buddhist sect that was strongly pro-American and anti-communist. Here you can see it's a poor picture, but on the left of him with General Hardin and with Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek, the president of nationalist China and later Taiwan. He was a very close friend and advisor to the national Chinese government, to Chiang Kai-shek. And on the right, you see him, a photo I took of him shortly before his death near his home in Monte Carlo, Monaco, just down the walk from the Grimaldi Palace. So how are most Americans getting informed about Vietnam, or what has given them what little knowledge they have about it, or the misinformation they have? Well, a prime example is this from PBS, Vietnam, a television history, a 13 segment propaganda piece that goes under the label of the American experience. It was really the anti-American experience that they are promoting in this video, which is still playing now. They're promoting it on PBS now. In fact, I'm glad to see that it has this banner over it now. If you go there, I just did this slide, made this slide a few days ago, and up there on the top it says, In red, urge Congress protect PBS funding. The federal funding that supports your public media is at risk of being eliminated. And I say hooray. That's one of the best things that President Trump could do. PBS, NPR, all of those socialist outfits they should be cut off from all federal funding. Taxpayers should not be funding our own destruction. So what's happening in Vietnam today? Well, we're being told, in fact, NPR, PBS, much of the intelligentsia, the State Department whatnot is telling us that Vietnam is our ticket to the future in Southeast Asia, and that Vietnam, we have to continue our massive aid to them so that they will be a bulwark for us against communist China. Well, that is more of the same propaganda that we got during the Vietnam War, where we were told we should sidle up to Beijing because we play the China card, and China would be our ally against Russia. So here you see Xi Jinping in Vietnam. This was just 3 weeks ago. And you see there, Vietnam-China issue joint statement. Xi calls for deepening building of China-Vietnam community with a shared future. This is from the Global Times. All these are taken from the Communist Chinese or Communist Vietnamese press. 75 years of China-Vietnam relations, a steady partnership in uncertain times, from the Global Times, which is state media of Communist China. But then here we see, this is from actually a couple of years ago, but if you've been following the news, you know that it's being replayed right now because Xi Jinping is where? He's in Moscow. He is there on a 4-day visit, meeting with Vladimir Putin. I just wrote our insider report, which goes out tomorrow, which goes into detail a number of agreements that they signed already in Moscow. Agreements on culture, on technology, on weapons, on military practice, on a host of areas that they have been very, very tight together on for quite some time. China, Russia, and Iran are ganging up on us. This is an alliance that's been underway for quite some time, and they're not alone. Here is Xi Jinping in Iran, and here he is, Saudi Arabia. Again, working on building those relations with both Saudi Arabia and the Arab states and Iran. And here he is, of course, with Maduro, a communist dictator in Venezuela. This issue of the New American, we ask, war with China? Well, Foreign Affairs, the flagship journal of the Council on Foreign Relations, finally notes what we've been saying for a long time. Xi Jinping says he is preparing China for war. The world should take him seriously. Well, Foreign Affairs and the Council on Foreign Relations are kind of late in waking up to this, even though they are referred to as the wise men of foreign affairs. They have been the wise men of betrayal for the last century. So are we headed to war with China, or are we already in a war that the Chinese Communist Party is furiously waging without us even recognizing it? Communist China is already waging unrestricted warfare against the United States. And this is the continuation, the war that never ended in Vietnam. Communist China, along with the Soviet Union, now we refer to it as Russia, were ultimately the forces that we were fighting in Vietnam. Vietnam had no chance. The Vietnamese communists had no chance of beating the anti-communists of South Vietnam without China and Russia's full support. But they're already at war with us. The CCP's COVID bioweapon destroyed hundreds of thousands of businesses, millions of jobs, and closed our churches. The CCP's COVID bioweapon transformed the United States and most of the world into facsimiles of the Chinese medical dictatorship. The CCP's COVID bioweapon subverted our election system, guaranteeing Joe Biden's White House ascendancy. The CCP's fentanyl offensive is killing our youth and destroying our communities. The CCP is sending massive numbers of Chinese migrants across our border. The CCP's Confucius societies and student groups are weaponizing our colleges and universities. The CCP's secret police are more boldly intimidating, threatening, and attacking Chinese dissidents in the U.S. The CCP is cornering strategic minerals to choke off U.S. access to vital materials. So, I mean, even some of the mainstream media, Bloomberg, for instance, recognize that China is using fentanyl for war with the U.S. by other means. People who are familiar with Chinese military theory are familiar with unrestricted warfare. It was written by two colonels of the People's Liberation Army of Communist China, and it presented a grand warfare strategy. This came out in 1999, 25 years ago, and in their grand strategy, they proposed using all military and non-military means to destroy an enemy, to submit to one's will. Carry this forward now. Just last year, we see this man, Jing Kangrong. He's a top CCP advisor. And in a video, which you can watch online, it's still up there, it hasn't been taken off yet, he gives 10 benefits of taking back Taiwan. And in that video, he calls for a number of offensives against the United States. He's known as a wolf warrior, that is, those who are very aggressive and call for aggressive actions against the United States. So he lays out the CCP's program, and it calls for the creation of multiple enemies for the U.S. to bog it down, deplete its resources, manipulate U.S. elections, control Congress, invest in the U.S., make U.S. dependent, control the U.S. market, control UN agencies and international organizations, the WHO, the IMF, the WTO, the FAO, continue stealing U.S. technology. So who is this guy, Jing Kangrong? Well, we know that he's a top member of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. But if you dig into his background, you go, whoa, he's also a speaker and a hotshot at the Aspen Institute. What is the Aspen Institute? It's one of the globalist organizations, along with the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, Bilderberg, which all of the elites of our foreign policy establishment, business establishment, who are doing business with China and the communist world, flock to. So here he is, top member of the CCP, a strategist for them. He's welcomed at the Aspen Institute. Whoa, well, what's this? Well, here he is a agenda contributor at the World Economic Forum, you know, that billionaires club in Davos, Switzerland, which now also has their World Economic Forum bashes in Beijing or other Chinese cities. And of course, that is run by, or was until very recently, by Klaus Schwab. And as you see there, they are the World Economic Forum. They are committed to improving the state of the world. Well, that's what they claim. Here's Klaus Schwab with Xi Jinping. He speaks so glowingly and in praise of Xi Jinping. And here's Ku Dongyu. And who is he? He is a member of the CCP. He's Director General of the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, you know, the organization that the UN plans to put in control of all the world's food supply. He is also a World Economic Forum bigwig. And of course, we know this gentleman, Bill Gates, another World Economic Forum doyen, and he is also comrades with Xi Jinping. This shows him at the Bao Forum. He has been inducted into the Chinese Hall of Fame for Science and Technology. What we have here, what we've seen, is that the Vietnam War was not lost by our military. It was lost by our political leaders. And our political leaders were following the guidance of globalists like Bill Gates, like Henry Kissinger, like David Rockefeller, who believe in a new world order where they will be able to rule like the communists without any dissidence or opposition. So they have been building this new world order with the communists. They helped the communists take over China, take over Korea, take over Vietnam and Southeast Asia. And they have been proceeding at pace until just recently, when President Trump, the MAGA movement, and others finally saw what we've been saying for decades, that look, this New World Order is a plan for global tyranny, and we have to stop it. We are now engaged in a life and death struggle with the forces of globalism and communism to retake our country. And it's that serious. And in doing that, this past year, I was invited to speak to a Vietnamese American Association of Vietnam Veterans group in Seattle. And while there, I went to their museum and cultural center, and I was extremely impressed. One of the things that impressed me was their presentation on General Tran, who was their 13th century hero, basically their El Cid, who stood against the Mongol Empire of China at that time. And he fought against them and won, prevailed in several key battles that looked overwhelming, where it looked like the Vietnamese had no chance of success. And before his last major battle, the Second Mongol invasion, he spoke to his officers. And what he said is so apropos for us today. He said, "Every century has produced its heroes who sacrificed their lives for their country. What if people only engaged in their own business died of old age at home by the fire? Would their names be inscribed in the history books for 1,000 generations? You and I were born in a period of troubles and have grown up at a time when the motherland is in danger. Since our motherland is in danger, I cannot eat during the day, sleepless at night, weeping in tears, angry at the enemies. I would rather die in the battlefields with my body wrapped in horse-skin. Your emperor is humiliated. Your country is threatened. How could you be indifferent, not worrying or ashamed?" That should speak to every American heart. We are in that same dire predicament, and we each have something that we can and must do. The John Birch Society has been fighting this battle and many others for now over 6 decades. And I'm honored that I've been able to do it for 5 decades now. And I have seen so much heroic action, so much heroism by members of the society. We have in our information on Vietnam, we were putting that out all during the war when other people were being carried away by all of the pro-communist propaganda. Colonel Louis Millette, Medal of Honor recipient, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Ranger Hall of Fame recipient, was on our speakers bureau. He traveled the country after serving on the battlefield and tell people what was really happening there. Lawrence James Stark, a veteran of the Army and the Navy, was a POW in Vietnam for 5 years. He went on our speakers tour and told the American people what was happening and fought for the return of the other POWs. Brigadier General Andrew Gatsis, the fighting general, was amazing in Vietnam, carried on many important battles, received a Silver Star and many other awards. He also was on our speakers tour and many others that we could name. It was because the John Birch Society believed in getting truth tellers out there and awakening the town, telling the people and getting people informed. This is a magazine that we did on General Hal Moore and the movie We Were Soldiers and the story behind it. It was one of my honors to interview Hal Moore and his wife, Mrs. Moore, as well as Sergeant Basil Plumley, who never gives interviews to anyone. It helped that General Moore gave me a little bit of an insight, but what really helped was that my dad was 82nd Airborne in World War II in all the jumps that Basil Plumley was in. So he conceded to talk to a member of the press, which he never did other than that. So we've been trying to tell the truth to the American people. And this gentleman I already mentioned to you, Professor Vu Ko Kee, he is I'm going to be working with him more in just the next few weeks. We're going to be doing some more video on Vietnam and a review of his books, which have just come out in new printing. To join the John Birch Society, it's very easy. If you come to one of our talks, you can sign up right there. But since you're online, the way to do it is to go to jbs.org/join, jbs.org/join. When you do that, you get a subscription to the New American Magazine. You can get the print magazine. We're one of the few magazines that still print the magazine, but we also have it online, thenewamerican.com. And there we have every day new stories, new information. And along with that, with your membership, you get the Insider Report, which is mailed out every Friday in PDF. You can either read it if you're a member, subscriber, you can read it online in the digital form or download it as a PDF. Go on there now and take a look at it, and you will find out that there is a lot of information that you probably aren't getting anywhere else because much of it isn't available anywhere else. I would make one last pitch here to go to our jbs.org join page. And after we close up here, I'd just like to again renew my invitation for all of you who are interested to get in touch with me to give me your information about Vietnam. We're going to be doing some more stories on that, and particularly if you have been involved in certain battles or campaigns that have been badly misrepresented in the media, we want to hear about that. So again, I thank all of you for coming out. We are going to have a Q&A period now, and I'll turn it over to Cal to take care of that.
First of all, that was quite a bit of history. Some could call that a red pill on Vietnam. I did have a question kind of from some of the information on your books about you mentioning Vietnam, Korea, even World War II, some of the tyranny that has happened. What was the most curable problem in Vietnam that would have avoided the war?
Well, it could have been
Outside of Congress, where you mentioned in your book that they were the ones who were supposed to be involved in deciding these conflicts and getting involved in any of these foreign affairs, not a
Right. Well,
president.
there are several important points which uh, impact your question. One, we never had a declaration of war by Congress. It's one of these unending wars. It just goes on and on. And the what could we have done to prevent the war? Well, first of all, the Vietnam War followed 6 years after the Korean War, and it's directly tied to it. The Korean War follows right after after the communists took over 3 years after, 2 years after the communists took over China. In each of those situations, it was betrayal by the globalists, the deep state in our government. And this is one of the benefits that we have now. When we were talking about this 50 years ago, people had no idea, no appreciation for, couldn't quite wrap their heads around that people in our government would be doing evil things like this, that they would be helping the enemy and hamstringing our own fighting forces. But we saw they did that first in China, turning it over to the communists. They hamstrung Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalist forces and guaranteed that Mao Zedong and his mass murdering regime would be installed in China. And then the next step was Korea, and the step right after that was Vietnam, and they are all linked together, and that is told in several books and in several of our presentations that are on our website, but principally by Robert Welch in his book, Again, May God Forgive Us, in uh, Professor Anthony Kubek's How the Far East Was Lost, and in Hilaire Duberrier's Background to Betrayal. Yes, Again, May God Forgive Us. You have the new edition of it. So, yes, very important. He gives the background to all of that. And so when you see it in the context of this continuous betrayal, and so it's very exasperating for many of us when we hear our allies, conservatives, who will say, "Oh, those people in the State Department, they're stupid. They don't know what they're doing, or they're crazy, or they're loonies." No, they are evil. They know what they are doing. They are intentionally destroying countries, destabilizing countries, aiding our enemies, and turning our allies uh, over to the enemy. And so until we expose that and get them rooted out, and we're seeing it now with everything that's happening in Trump 45, and then what happened during the Biden years, and now what we see again during Trump 47, all of the deep state elements in the media, in government, all in bureaucracy, and in the opposition are trying to foil any move toward getting us back to any semblance of sanity.
Yeah, some of our viewers have commented to get us out of the United Nations would be a good step as well, which you mentioned there, because they were involved in a lot of this with their globalist and deep state. We also had a comment about, being uh, humble enough to the quote here was, "I think we need to pray for all these people." How has the moral basis, I asked this to G. Edward Griffin one time, how has the moral basis helped protect a free society? Would you like to offer some comments on that? And like the perhaps the Congress shall not, shall not, shall not, and if we forgot something, it's reserved to the people. Um,
Yes. So since you mentioned it, particularly in that way, you know, the U.S. Constitution it is the foundation of our political economic system. It lays out a limited government, a limited constitutional government, and it says that the government shall not, just as the Ten Commandments tell us as individuals, uh, we shall not commit adultery, we shall not commit murder, we shall not uh, steal. Well, the government has those kind of commandments written into the Constitution. The Constitution grants the federal government certain powers. Only those enumerated, delegated powers. All the rest are reserved powers to the states and to the people. And but in order to have that function, and all of the founding fathers, George Washington, John Adams, James Madison, Patrick Henry, all of them stated that this kind of government, this type of government, which they were founding, could only work with a moral people. And George Washington said it is vain to think that we can have any moral uh, principles in the absence of religion. So, in order to have a strong morality, you have to have a strong belief in God and adhere to God's commandments. If you do that, you won't be tempted or you won't fall victim to the temptations to look to government for the solutions to all of your problems. Look to government for all of providing all of your needs. Uh, you'll realize that you are a creature of God. He's given you independence and agency, and you have a way. He will always give you what you need if you work for it, and he will provide you the means to do so. So if you don't have that, if you don't have strong families who inculcate that into their children and who take their care of their own children instead of turning them over to the state, to the government school system, to the government daycare centers, or their proxies, uh, if you don't do that, you can continue to have a strong family, which then gives us a strong society and a strong limited government. So it is morality and the spiritual aspect of this are foundational, central to the whole thing that we're trying to do. To get us out of the mess that we're in, it can't all be done with politics. Uh, Politics and political measures have to be taken because that's how we live in society. So we have a political instrumentality that has to be used, but we have to use it wisely, and we have to uh, ad adhere to moral principles that guide it.
Yes, thank you for that. That is really the basis. Thank you. That was a very incredible summary. There is a viewer that expressed that there was a similarity between Afghanistan and Vietnam, and that the wars could not have been won, and because the South Vietnamese, this viewer and other people have been told and believe that it just couldn't have been won because the people in South Vietnam were not opposed uh, to what had happened. They almost as if some people might think they deserved it. Maybe even some of the people of different faiths might think that the people in different countries who are not of their faith deserve it.
When Vietnam was divided between the North and the South, what happened? Did people flood from the South to go up north to the communist side? No. We had millions flee from the North to come south, and millions more would have left if they had been able to, if they had been allowed to. But the Iron Curtain, the bamboo curtain, came down, and communist Vietnam, led by Ho Chi Minh, who was a satrap for Communist China and Communist Soviet Union ruled with an iron fist. And it is absolutely a lie. It's ridiculous on the face of it that the people of North Vietnam uh, loved and revered Ho Chi Minh. It's the same with Mao Zedong in Communist China. Yes, you can find video of old footage of all the young people in China with their red books, Mao's red books, praising Mao. But if you indoctrinate uh, a few million youth and promise them all kinds of things, give them all kinds of new freedoms, and give them all kinds of new power, you can get them to rampage like that for a while until the usefulness is over. And he said the same thing. And then after that, the uh, Mao's Red Guards were rounded up, and many of them ended up in the same re-education camps that they'd been sending their victims to. And it's the same thing over again in communist North Vietnam. And you look at the death toll during leading up to from 1945 to 1955. R.J. Rummel, professor political science, University of Hawaii, wrote a number of books on what he called democide. Democide, he says, was the mass murder of people by of dictators of their own people. So genocide on a massive scale, and he quantified. He spent a lot of time on. He did about 5 books on this, and we've reviewed them and promoted them because he goes in great detail about all of the atrocities and the torture and the murder of all of these people. And he puts the figures for Vietnam under the communists, both before they took over and after they took over, and it's quite horrendous. So, uh, you know, when the Saigon fell, we had millions of people who fled or attempted to flee, who came here. Most of them came to the United States. Many went to Europe and other countries where they could get in as well. But nobody knows how many hundreds of thousands drowned at sea or were killed by the pirates or just never made it. And
Yes, sir.
there's another
Mhm.
facet to that because we're often told that, well, the South Vietnamese government was so corrupt that people really didn't like it. Well, Hilaire de Berry in his book Background to Betrayal provides, it's one of the best sources for that. He shows that just like Pham Chong An, the Time reporter who was a communist agent, the South Vietnamese government and society was riddled with all kinds of agents like that who, and he names a number of prominent ones who had high places in the South Vietnamese government, in the military, and in their business and media. And their whole job was to make a mess of things and to fan the flames of corruption wherever they could, just so that it would discredit from within. And I mean, that's a common uh, communist tactic to discredit from within. And if you can create enough, they did the same thing in China, in China when before the communists took over. The Kuomintang and the nationalist government was riddled with communists whose whole job was to make things miserable for all the Chinese people, so that it would be
Yeah.
blamed on the government.
Mm. Yes, thank you very much, Bill. Um, I don't remember accidentally, or if I did accidentally, forgetting to mention America in the Pledge of Allegiance, but I think somebody might have caught me here. If I did, it was an accident. But there is also a question from a viewer: will the presentation explain the propaganda, or have or do we have to go read about it? So I think you covered some of the propaganda.
Yeah,
Um,
so one
is
of the ways you can do that is on the jbs.org / Vietnam. We have a whole section just on the media, and in the Seven Myths article that I highlighted, there are many examples of the media cited in there, actual quotations with the footnotes, and in many cases, things that are now available online. It gives the URLs. So, I mean, there have been a number of books. Peter Braystrip who was a journalist, did a book just on that. Um, the title of it is evading me right now, but I mentioned that in the a number of articles, including the Seven Myths article. And he gives many, many examples of that. The example that I gave of Henry Steele Commager, a very famous American historian and media celebrity before his death, uh, that quotation that I gave in there about him comparing the American brutality, or as he called it, savagery, and Vietnam comparable to the Japanese rape of Manchuria and the Nazi takeover of Germany, of Poland. So there are numerous examples in there, and we probably will do in a later follow-up video go into some of those specifics. One of this presentation, we've had a little bit of problems with the PowerPoint there, trying to get things to work. Actually, I just got back from this trip, and so I had to do a revision of the presentation for tonight, and I'm doing another one in a couple of weeks, and I think we're probably going to, that will be a live one at a venue, but we probably will be doing a couple more of these in which I hope to actually include some television uh, propaganda examples, some shortcuts, as well as print media that we can include.
Thank you, Bill. I'm sure everyone has benefited from, if not everything that has been presented, at least much of the reality that there has been so much unexplained information by the media, and we have a lot of people that are reaching for truth to understand this most evil design system of political power, communism, and the other false philosophies of monopolies, and so a question came up of, who started this, why was it started, the CETO and the Tonkin Gulf, and we're going to have to close pretty soon. And then there was one last question, and I apologize if we had to skip over. I think maybe we'll pick up another segment of this. The other question was, who were the beneficiaries of the Vietnam War, and who were the real winners? Communism in
Well,
general,
as I
or
said before, really, yes, the communists were the beneficiaries of it. They've been ruling Vietnam ever since, and Laos and Cambodia. So all of those countries, they are all slave states, prison states, like communist China, which is their main mentor and supplier. But they all have close relations with Russia as well. So, I mean, that has basically turned over all of Southeast Asia to the communist collective there. So, obviously, the communists have benefited from it. But the globalists who helped them get to power, the members of the Council on Foreign Relations, particularly, whom we've focused on, because the Council on Foreign Relations was founded in 1921, over 100 years ago. And during that time, they have weaseled their way into all aspects, not only of our government, but of the media, of academia, of all of our social institutions and business institutions. And so they do have an agenda, and it is to create a one world government. We've shown that over and over again in their own words, in their own admissions against interests. It's so the globalists have benefited from it because they have established these communist dictatorships, which don't have to abide by any of the rules which they put on our businesses, on our citizens. And then they load up the American economy with regulations and taxes, which are disincentives to produce, and then tell them, look, over here in China, in Vietnam, in Laos, and Cambodia, you can set up your manufacturing business over there. You can set up your all of your production over here and not have to worry about any of those environmental controls, OSHA, labor disputes, because the communists have a slave population that can do the work for you for pennies on the dollar. So the globalists have benefited from this. The American people have not, and we're seeing that now. And that is why there is such communist and globalist opposition to the Trump plan to repatriate American businesses, to take those offshore businesses and bring them back.
Yes, thank you very much for that. I know we are running out of time. We have about 1 minute left, but one of the benefits that I have and why I joined the John Birch Society is because uh, they don't speak generally about the problems, just as you were specific names, places, dates, people involved. The John Birch Society has done a very incredible job of, like you do in your book, of documenting research with sites in the back of exactly who, when, and what's going on. So I do encourage, uh, and I'll leave you with the last word. But I do encourage everyone to consider, if they haven't awakened to the sense of their awful situation already because of the global conspiracy, that they might consider making it a study to ask these two questions that are found in this great book. Um, and a great American has said that in any struggle, it is essential to know two things: what you are fighting for and what you are fighting against. If the knowledge of what you're fighting for is absent, the will to win will be lacking. And if the knowledge of the latter, or what you're fighting against, is absent, confusion and uncertainty will result. So it's essential that we know what we're fighting for and what we're really fighting against. And with the propaganda machine we saw in Vietnam, where it ended up Americans were fighting each other during the middle of this thing. Hanoi Jane and other propagandists were fighting against the American opinion to dig deeper, just like in COVID. We finally found out the truths about that. And also, in closing, we didn't really touch on the Agent Orange thing that happened, some of the chemical poisoning and the aftermath of all that, just like the John Birch Society did publish on some of that. And so I'd like to close my comments with that really this wonderful message and presentation was to help support our troops and remember our veterans, and actually have some memory of all who gave, all in honor of all who served or who do serve. And one last thing, I talked to a gentleman. I said, "You need to. Would you be interested in watching this webinar tonight?" And he said, "Oh, I can't look back. I have to look forward." So I hope that we look forward and backwards, because if we're not willing to learn from history, we are bound to repeat it. So thank you, Bill, and go ahead. You have the closing remark.
No, I think you've summed it up well. I again thank everyone for coming out tonight. You had other things you could have been doing, but you decided to uh, see what you could do to undo the damage that has been done to us and to everyone else with the lies. It's time to tell the truth, and we are truth tellers. So let's go out and do that. Thank you. God bless, and look forward to seeing and hearing from many of you in the future.
And the Panama Canal on June 12th. We have that coming up. That should pop up on your screen. And we invite you to go to jbs.org, look at the events calendar, and stay in touch with us. So once again, thank you, Bill, and thank you, everyone.